and welcome to this, our 64th live stream, a flock of Horus birds. Now, the Horus, the Egyptian god Horus, is represented by an Egyptian falcon. Now, I've seen Egyptian falcons. When I was at the site of Abu Simbel, there's this little jetty that sort of goes out onto Lake Nasser. I was kind of hoping to get a picture of Abu Simbel from a distance, but they had blocked the view. But there's a telephone pole at the end of this jetty. At the top of this totem pole were 3 Horus falcons, or Egyptian falcons. It was really kind of a cool thing to see. So, we chose this title because our video from Monday was Horus, the god of kingship. So that's the reason why we chose today's title. So anyway, we're going to probably just get right into it. There isn't a lot of housekeeping tonight. We've got the same rules as we always do, which is super chats have priority. If you're not going to ask a super chat, we ask that you put a Q and a colon in front of your question, because we do take non-super chat questions as well. We also ask that you only ask the question once. Duplicate questions will not be answered. That's because I scan through the questions and I look for things that I answer or have passed over. We don't guarantee that every question will be answered. You know, this is just straight up YouTube rules. Even super chats. We do try to address and thank every super chat, but the YouTube rules are that super chats give you visibility, not utter access. But we do try to make a good faith effort to answer every super chat question. The non-super chats, we sort of pick and choose. We pick the interesting questions, just because we usually get so many, we'd be here all night if we didn't. So we don't take everything from non-super chats. And finally, if it is a question that has to do with a verse in the Bible or a foreign word, we ask that you give us a little bit of context. In the case of a Bible verse, it would be great to have the book, biblical book, chapter and verse. In the case of a foreign word, we ask that you give us the language and what you think it means, so that we have just a little bit of context to go on. So with that said, let's get into this. And we're going to start the night with 5 non-super chats. Okay. Our first non-super chat tonight is from Please Enjoy Game OSU. And he asks, how do I respond to skeptics claiming that Abraham could not have traveled from Ur of the Chaldees and met with the Philistine kings because they didn't exist till 1,000 years later? Okay. What we have here is a complex question. This is a complex question. There's actually several issues happening in this particular question. You do have the question of the Ur of the Chaldees and its identification. Now, my personal thoughts on this is that it's not Ur of the Chaldees, it's Urkesh. But that's a whole different matter what's being asked here. He's really asking about the Philistine kings and their relation to, say, Abraham. And we get this mention of this in Genesis. I think it's Genesis. Let's see if I can find this here. And 26:1 is probably the most famous of these passages, but the book of Genesis mentions the Philistines several times. Like, for example, in 26:1 here. Now there was a famine in the land, besides the previous famine that had occurred in the days of Abraham. So Isaac went to Gerar and Abimelech, king of the Philistines. Now what we have here is an anachronistic problem. The idea is that essentially the Philistines make their first foray into the coastal plain of Canaan, roughly around, say, 1400 BC, roughly. But what we have here is basically a event that takes place 300 years before that. Abraham being roughly 1725-ish. Okay, so what do we make of this? Because there could not have been Philistines back at this time. Well, what we have here is what's called a retrojection. And retrojections often occur in, say, Genesis. We can find a lot of them in Genesis. Now, what's a retrojection? A retrojection is using, say, today's language to talk about events, people, places in the distant past, using the terminology that's contemporary with the author. That terminology may not have been used in, say, the distant past. Like, for example, when we talk about, say, as far as, say, Aztec or pre-Columbian civilizations in North and South America, we might talk about, say, pre-Columbian America. Well, the term America there would be a retrojection. The land was not known as America until, say, Amerigo Vespucci, the Italian mapmaker. So we have to be aware that there are a lot of these retrojections in, say, the book of Genesis. For example, when it talks about the land of Goshen being the land of Ramses, that's a retrojection because Ramses is a 13th century person. You know, his clan, the Ramesside clan, is 13th century. But the events are taking place long before that. When it talks about Abraham meeting with the Pharaoh, Pharaoh is a term that wasn't coined until the reign of Thutmose III. What we have with the book of Genesis is a 13th century author that's writing about the past using the terminology of his day. So that's what's going on in this text, and that's what's happening, say, when, say, Abraham meets the kings of the Philistines. You know, there are no Philistines there, but the lands will be known as Philistine lands by the time that text is being written down. So that's what's going on in this text. It's pure retrojection. Nothing earth-shattering here, but we do have to recognize it. For example, we can't just say, "Oh, they were Philistines in Israel at the time because the book of Genesis says so." We got to be a little careful about that. So we have to be careful not to mistake retrojection for pure historical chronicling. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the question. It's a very good question, and it's one we do get sometimes. And I hope when you respond to skeptics that you do so in love and basically try to explain these more complicated aspects of reading the Bible to them. So thank you very much for the question. Okay, our next question is from Magnificent Universe. Great name. I've stumbled upon some Christian pages that claim that the wall in Karnak from the time of Shoshank was the Fields of Abraham and the Highlands of David toponym inscribed on it. Now, I would have to look at the Shoshank relief to actually verify that or not. I do not think that's on there, but I'd have to go into that in more detail. That'd be the Bubastite portal and its translation. Toponym list for that. What's that? Okay, so the Bubastic portal. Let's see if I can find a nice translation of that. Champollion has one, but that's probably not what we. Uh, the Oriental Institute. There we go. Take a look. Raise this up. Try to raise this up quickly. Piece 74. Now, for those who are really interested in this sort of stuff, the Oriental Institute has some great publications. Highly recommend their free. I mean, they give away a lot of their publications once they're published. So, highly recommend the Oriental Institute. Question is, which one's good? It's going to be faster. My slow NAS or my speedy download? Okay, let's just see here. Okay, Karnak. Oh. Plate 7. I'm just going to take a quick scan of the toponym list to see if I can see anything here that says Fields of Abraham or Highlands of David. I doubt it, though. That's possible. It is late enough that's a possibility. But see, Fields of Yak. Yakka. That ain't it. Hmm. Nope. I see the king of Judah, or Judah is king. That I see in the list. So that's there. We get Yudah M or me Merek, sorry, Merek, which is Judah Yudah Melech, basically Judah is king. So we do see that in the list. So there might have been a little town there called Judah's Melech, Judah's king there. But I don't really see here a Highlands of David or Fields of Abraham. But then again, too, I'm not going to be able to go through the complete list here and have a look. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to give you a complete answer of that. But I just really sort of rapidly looking at it, I don't see it. But that's neither. I can't confirm it, but I can't deny it either. So I'd have to probably take a deeper look into the toponym list and see if there's anything that matches either of these. But anyway, it is a very good question, and I was meaning to answer this. I just didn't get a chance to go and do the background work to look this one up. So anyway, I thank you for the question. I would encourage you to ask this question, say, in a subsequent stream. Next time I'll be better prepared for this, and I'll make sure that I answer this. Okay? So, but because I did want to bring this up because this question is worthwhile. But I just ran out of time, it seems, to do the proper preparation for this. I apologize for that, but sometimes that does happen. Okay. The third non-super chat question is, hi, Dr. Falk. The other week, I think you mentioned the amount of apostasy currently in the church body. Do you have advice on dealing with this for new believers, those looking to join a church? For those looking to join a church, I would look for a church that has a mentorship program. Now, mentorship programs are pretty rare. And when they are usually implemented, they're usually not very good. But that's sort of the best way, I think, that you can, because we get from the Great Commission. The Great Commission says, "Go forth and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, teaching them everything that I have taught you." Okay? A lot of churches are great on the baptism part. We're not so good on the making the disciples bit, a disciple being a disciplined follower, or teaching them everything Christ taught you. We're terrible about this. I mean, let's be very blunt about this. The teaching function of the church has been largely replaced by charismatic, emotion-driven worship. And unfortunately, the problem with emotion-driven worship is experiential. Now, I don't deny that experiential worship can bring you closer to God. It just doesn't give you good, solid, deep roots. And that's what, say, new believers need, is they need to grow their roots deep into the Word of God. They need to become thoroughly, trained in how to be a Christian, how to study the Word of God. This might as well be. The Bible might as well be a book from outer space for most new believers, because in our culture today, we don't have any context that allows a new believer to really understand the Bible. Back in the early church, churches were more like philosophical training schools, where you would have, say, a teacher. He'd sit on a stool, and all the learners would be sitting on the floor, as the teacher teaches. So I think we need to start taking a more early church model as far as discipleship goes. Where you have a small group where one teacher is really mentoring a small group of people, and maybe no more than 5, 5 or 8, just really have that sort of close relationship in mentoring. We do have in some churches, say, membership classes that do get quite intimate, but they tend to be a lot more focused on the church distinctives, when I think they need to be more focused on, say, the essentials of the faith, because that's where people are getting lost. They're getting lost on, say, the essentials, how to discover biblical truths for themselves, and how to start thinking in a way that's biblical and be honest, will allow them to grow. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciate it. Okay, our next non-super chat is from Magnificent Universe again. He says, in your video about the altar at Ebal at 12:25, you said that the second scarab has the name of Ramses on it. I said that to a proponent in the early days. He said that it's wrong. Did he or you make a mistake? I made the mistake. Okay. On ancient Egypt and the Bible on our channel, we admit our mistakes. Okay. So it was me that made the mistake. On the other scarab, the name Ramses does not appear. However, let's pull up the definitive article on this and see what it does say, because it's also very interesting. I'll pull up here and the article here is by Baruch Brandel. 2 scarabs and a trapezoid seal from Mount Ebal. And this is from the journal Tel Aviv, and this is the preeminent archaeological Israeli archaeological journal. Okay, so this is very good stuff, very highly vetted. And this is the article where the two scarabs were published. Now, we got pictures here of the two scarabs. Now, in scarab 1 here is the scarab where I made the mistake. I'll say Ramses on it. And on scarab 2, we do have the throne name of Tutmosis III. Okay? Here's the catch. Here's the rub, though. You go down to what he says about scarab 1. And what he's going to say about scarab 1 is that all the scarabs that are similar to this scarab are 19th dynasty or at latest 20th dynasty. They are absolutely definitively a Ramesside scarab type. Okay? So, and I read here, quote on page 168. According to rule, the side type is dated exclusively to the 19th dynasty. The parallels are all dated to Ramses II and his 19th dynasty successors, except for the scarab found in tomb 960 at Tel El Farah, which would prima facie indicate continued production of this type of scarab, this type into the reign of Ramses IV of dynasty 20. Okay? So what he is saying here is there's no mistake that this is a Dynasty 19 scarab. It's absolutely unmistakable as a Dynasty 19 scarab. So while he is right, the name, while your opponent is correct, that the name of Ramses II does not appear on that first scarab, he doesn't actually help him because it's still a Dynasty 19 scarab. So I did make a mistake. I did incorrectly say that the name Ramses II appears on that scarab, and I fully admit that mistake. And but unfortunately, it really doesn't help him because it's still identified as a Dynasty 19 scarab. So, and the fact is, the same sort of criteria that's used to date scarab 1 as a Dynasty 19 scarab also applies to scarab number 2. The one with the name Tutmosis III also has those same identifying markers, those stylistic markers of a Dynasty 19 scarab. So anyway, I would encourage everyone to read read that paper by Brandel. It's a great paper. It's the definitive paper. It's not very long either. It's only a few, like 5 pages. It's really a short article. So that should settle it right there. I think anything else is sort of like muddying the waters. So anyway, I'm sorry for the confusion. I'm sorry for the mistake. We do try to always correct ourselves when we discover we've made a mistake. And you pointing this out did help us to discover that we had made a mistake here. So I want to thank you very much for that question and let you know that, we go good for our mistakes. We do our best. Sometimes we make mistakes. We're human. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciated. Okay, our 5th question here is from the Mr. B, the MRB. How do we know that the Egyptians didn't discover boiling water to make drinking water? Well, we don't know. We do know that the Egyptians could boil water. They did make vessels that were used to boil water. Okay, so they did make boiling water. But the question is, there's also a different question here, which is, why make boiling water to drink when you can make water at like a lower temperature, like 70 degrees Celsius, and make beer instead? Beer's tastier. Beer has a lot of extra nutrients in it. It's very plain that beer was used as a form of water for purification all on its own. But also because of the way beer is made, it's also done in such a fashion that it takes less fuel. And we have to remember that in Egypt, fuel is at a premium. People are not going to boil water all the time just for drinking. They might do it for beer because there's some extra benefit out of that, but they may not do it just for drinking water. And frankly, boiled water, by the time it cools down, it's probably not all that clean anymore and not all that appetizing. So I think that this is one of those cases where that they're just, using the resources in a way that makes more sense to them. So we do know that they did boil water. We do know that because the Egyptians make soups, like for example knucklebone soup. They did boil water. They had the facilities to boil water, but we don't have any evidence that they did it for drinking purposes outside of beer. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. It's an interesting question. Okay, we're done with the non-super chats now. Let's get on to the super chats. Our first super chat today is from MJ for $5. Thank you so very much for that super chat. Why did Abram lie about Sarah being his sister to Pharaoh? Didn't the Egyptian pharaohs practice incest? Wasn't Sarah Abram's half-sister anyway? Thanks. Okay. This is an interesting set of questions, and you actually have 3 questions here. The first one is Abraham tells us himself why he lied about Sarah being his sister to Pharaoh. He was essentially afraid. He was afraid that that Pharaoh would kill him and steal his wife, essentially. So he wanted to save his skin, his worthless skin. Okay. So that's why he lies about Sarah being his sister. Okay. Second question: didn't the Egyptian pharaohs practice incest? Well, sometimes. Okay, it wasn't normal though. Incest between for Egyptian pharaohs occurred typically when during times of succession crisis, when it wasn't clear that there'd be a successor to the throne. So in times when there was a succession crisis, yes, the Egyptians did practice incest as a form of sympathetic magic. The idea here is that the king's blood is special and more potent, so his sister's blood must also be special and potent, so you get the two together and you'll get success, creating a successor. Yeah, it didn't work that way. Really didn't work that way. Ooh. And this is probably the reason why the King Tutankhamun didn't produce an heir. Was because he had been hitched up with his half sister. And that was a succession crisis that just was just made worse by the introduction of a consanguineous marriage. So there's that problem there. Now, the final thing here. Question: wasn't Sarah Abraham's half sister anyway? Well, that's a really provocative question all on its own. Now, we do know that Sarah was the daughter of I think, let me just see here. I'll just look it up. I think it's let me make sure I get this right. Yeah, according to Genesis 11:29, the name of Abraham's wife was Sarai. The name of Milcah's wife was Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iscah. Okay, so it's not that she's a half sister, but she's more of a niece. Okay? She's more of a niece, and I believe I took grandson, and Sarah his daughter-in-law. Yeah, I think she's a niece, is what she is. If I remember correctly, she is the daughter of. Although it doesn't actually say. Yeah, I think she was. I think she's technically in, but it's possible too that say the quote brothers of Abraham were actually were not actually brothers, but uncles. Okay, so it's possible that the like for example, let's see here, ended Genesis 11 here. Abraham, Nahor, and Haran. It's possible that these were not actually brothers. The relationship between Abram and say Nahor and Haran might have been one of say Abraham was Terah's grandson and Nahor and Haran were Terah's sons. So you have a relationship of say Abraham was say the nephew of Nahor and Haran. So it might have been basically a uncle nephew relationship between them. And that would make say Sarah also the appropriate age as well. So that's sort of what I'm thinking here, is that Sarah wasn't a half sister, but was a niece, as it were, or basically a second cousin, as it were. So those are the possibilities here. I don't think we really. I mean, I haven't actually looked closely into the relationship of Sarah issue, but I think that's what's going on here. Because one of the things, yeah, part of the clan, but not that close. So she would be on a different clade of the clan, and a clan is made up of multiple clades, basically lines of families. Okay? So she'd be part of the clan, but a different clade of the clan. So what we have here is, I think, where she's not a sister, but she's a distant relative, okay? Distant enough so that was that incest wasn't really going to be an issue for Abraham. Okay, so the other thing, other matter too, is we have to also take into account that the fact that Abraham or Terah was 130 at the time when he begot Abraham. And we know this because of Acts chapter 7 tells us that Abraham left Haran after the death of Terah. So this is how we know that Terah was 130 years old. Okay. But at the same time, too, Abraham also goes, well, who at 100 could possibly bear a child? Well, the only way that makes any logical sense is if Abraham wasn't a son of Terah, but a grandson, essentially. So if Abraham is in fact a grandson of Terah, then Sarah could be a further distant relative than just a half sister. She could easily be, say, as I say, a niece or a second cousin. So anyway, I want to thank you for that super chat. Very much appreciated, and it's a good question. Several questions. Okay, thank you very much. Have a great night. Okay. Our next super chat comes from Brick Creation for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hi, Dr. Falk. In heaven, I'll ask God to replay on a TV events in the Bible the way they actually took place in real time. What would you ask God? I want access to his library. Just do a whole information dump like on the Matrix. So Yeah, I'm definitely thinking here that if I had to ask, what would I ask God? I'd ask God for his, access to his library and enough time to actually read it. Yeah, that's what eternity's for. I finally get the opportunity to read again. So anyway, I want to thank you for that super chat and for that real fun question. But that's what I would ask. I'd ask for the keys to God's library. So thank you very much for the super chat. Okay. Brick creation for $2. What is the origin of son of Belial? Okay. The origin of the term sons, and it's usually sons of Belial, comes from a Hebrew expression, b'nai Belial, and that means sons without value, or sons of worthlessness. Essentially, um, people with no value. Okay. Now, this term is used all the way back into, say, into the times of the judges. It's a very old term. A very old term. I believe it's even found in the Pentateuch, although I'm not sure about this. But it does refer to people that have no value, you know. And later on, say during the Second Temple period, it's going to take on a more, how do I say this? Demonological interpretation. During the Second Temple period, people are going to interpret the sons of Belial as being sons of basically, they will cast Belial as a demon or a fallen angel. I think this is one of those times where things get really lost over time. The earliest readings of this don't seem to have any, say, demonological connection. Whereas, say, once you get into Second Temple period Judaism, you're going to get that influence of the sons of God theology, and that's going to color the reading of certain texts, like, say, the sons of Belial. So, uh, again, we have to read these things within their historical context. So, it's just to put it quickly, it is just simply a term that means worthless people, sons of worthlessness, sons without value. Again, but later on, going to be associated with demonic powers. But that can tell you how interpretation can change over time based upon the cultural context of the period. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Interesting question. Our next super chat is from Brick Creation for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. In Hebrew, Isaiah 45:13 doesn't mention Cyrus. Does the grammar mean that he's the one who is supposed to rebuild Jerusalem? If so, did he? Or is this messianic solely? Any amphiboly in this verse? Well, let's take a look and find out. Go to, yeah. 5:13. All right. Well, if we go right to say during the first verse of this passage, I mean, this says, "Thus says the Lord to Cyrus, his anointed, um, whom I have taken by the right hand to subdue nations before him, to loose the loins of the kings, to open the doors before him, so that gates will not be shut. I will go before you to make rough places smooth. I will shatter doors of bronze and cut through their iron bars. And I will give you the treasures of darkness and hidden wealth of secret places." Places here, that's cult places, by the way. "In order that you may know that it is I, the Lord, the God of Israel, who calls you by your name. For the sake of Jacob, my servant, and Israel, my chosen one, I have also called you by your name, giving you the title of honor though you have not known me." Okay. So then he goes into a theological statement here. In verse 5, I am the Lord, there is none other. Besides me, there is no God. I will gird you, though you have not known me. That men may know from the rising and setting of the sun that there is no one besides me. I am the Lord, there is no other. Then let's dip down now to verse 13. We've got a pretty good context going on here. A little here. To verse 11. Thus says the Lord, the Holy One of Israel, and his Maker. Okay, basically the guy who creates, who forms. Ask me about the things to come concerning my sons, and you shall commit to me the works of my hands. It is I who made the earth and created man upon it. I stretched out the heavens with my hands. I ordained all their hosts. I have aroused him in righteousness, and I will make all his ways smooth. He will build my city and will let my exiles go free without any payment or reward, says the Lord of hosts. Okay. Now, I think you have correctly assessed here that there is some amphibly going on. Early in the text, we do see the beginning of the, it starts off by talking about Cyrus, king of Persia. Okay? Cyrus the Great, and if we're going to be particular here. But it then starts going into, say, theological discourse, where it is definitely talking about the Messiah. This Messiah is also given the status as creator. Okay, so Isaiah 45:11 here strongly parallels, I believe it is 44:10, where it says, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, King of Israel, and his Redeemer." Thus says the Lord, King of Israel, and his Redeemer, the Yahweh of hosts. So we do see this parallel here. So given that parallel, this maker here is definitely a reference to the Messiah, the second person of the Trinity. So, there is, and actually, there's a dirty varmint in one of the chat in the live stream chat here says, I think Cyrus was actually a Messiah of his time, and actually the text does actually say that. The text does use the word Mashiach in reference to Cyrus. So in many ways, Cyrus is seen as a restorer, a builder, basically somebody who's going to restore his people, the people of Israel, God's people. And, the result of this is that the city's going to be rebuilt, the temple's going to be rebuilt, Israel's going to come back to their God. But that can't happen completely until the coming of Messiah. So this is definitely both talking about Messiah, essentially the Holy One of Israel and his Maker, or the Holy One of King of Yahweh, King of Israel, and his Redeemer, in the case of the other passage. And this is going to be definitely talking a little bit about Cyrus, but also the sort of the greater fulfillment through, say, the coming of Jesus Christ. Anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. It's a great question. That whole thing about amphibly is very, very interesting. As I said, it occurs all over the place in the Hebrew Scriptures. It happens all over the place in ancient texts. We just, as, say, modern Western readers, don't clue into it very often. So anyway, thank you very much for that super chat. Very much appreciated, and it's a great set of questions. Okay, the next question comes from Frog Paste for $30. Thank you very much for the super chat. Second Chronicles 14:9 says, Zerah the Ethiopian came against King Asa with a mighty army. To do this, he would have had to pass through Egypt. So what's going on in Egypt at the time that Sarah was able to march through it? Okay. What's happening at the time is that Egypt was ruled by the 22nd dynasty king Osorkon I. Now, here's the thing. Zerah is not an Egyptian name. Not a Hebrew name, Egyptian name. It's not a Semitic name of any kind. So what we have here is probably an infamous general. And we do get this from time to time, where, say, texts will talk about infamous generals. We do find this, for example, in the annals of Supiluma, the deeds of Supiluma, the deeds of Supiluliluma the First. I was gonna name one of my giant rabbits someday Supiluliluma, just because it's a tongue twister. My wife said, absolutely not. So in the deeds of Supiluliluma the First, there's a fragment of one of the tablets of that talks about General Horemheb before he was king. Basically, there where the Hittites go and do battle against Haram being Horemheb, and that was before Horemheb was actually king. So we do find that ancient texts do reference opponents that are infamous generals. So what's going on here is that Osokon is part of that 22nd Libyan dynasty. And the Libyans themselves were mercenaries. They were mercenaries. They hired mercenaries. They used mercenaries. They had Semitic corps of divisions of, say, Semitic soldiers. They had divisions of Nubian soldiers and Cushite soldiers. So they were very, very. They were not opposed in the slightest of, say, hiring a army from Cush, under a general that gets results, and sending him off to war. So that's what's happening here. Is Osokon I has hired a general, Zerah the Cushite, and is sending him off to do battle and campaign in the Levant on Osokon I's behalf. So that's why he could march through, is because they were allowed to march through. So they're basically coming from Cush and moving through Egypt and into the Levant on behalf of Osokon I. So anyway, thank you very much for that really generous super chat. $30 was a great super chat. Thank you so very much for that super chat. It's a good question too, because we don't know much about Zerah. We know he's not a king. That's about all we know. So we can only assume at this point that he's an infamous general, and there were infamous generals. Even before Ramses I came to the throne, we actually have, say, records of Ramses I, and he was called Pa Ramses, the Ramses, because he was that infamous. So that happened. That people were so infamous that other kings recorded the names of those generals because they were worthy opponents. So anyway, thank you very much for that. Such a great super chat. Thank you for that great question. Okay, the next one here is from Andrew Goulet for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. According to 1 Kings 2016, Ben-Hadad attacked Israel with a coalition of 32 kings. Does that literally mean 32 heads of state? Seems like a large coalition against a small country like Israel. Okay. Now, heads of state here is really very dodgy. Now, let me pull up the passage here, and it's always worthwhile to give it a read. Go with 1 Kings, chapter 20. Oh, let's actually start here, because that's going to give us some extra context. All right. First Kings 21. Now Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, gathered all his army, and there were 32 kings with him, with horses and chariots. Okay. That's actually probably all the context we need right here. We have to understand that during the time of the kings, the Aram was not a unified state. It was not a unified state. It was a collection of small city-states that had sort of broken up after the fall of the Mitanni Empire. When the Mitanni Empire fell, it did not leave a unified nation of Aram. It left all these, say, post-Mitanni states. Many of them became sojourners that we know as the Hurrians, or in the Bible, the Hivites, or in the Egyptian, the Kuru. But a lot of them have formed these small city-states. So what he's talking about here is not that he's not gathering big heads of state countries. He's gathering together 32 smaller city-states to form a coalition. And this happened. We see this actually in the War of Kings in Genesis, I think it's 14, where you have the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, and other kings uniting as a common front to do a common front against a superior foe. So I think that's what's going on here. Is it's not as impressive as it sounds. Okay, okay. You'd think 32 kings. Wow, 32 kings means 32 kingdoms. 32 kingdoms, lots of people. Well, not exactly. You might not get as many people in that, say, coalition as you think you're getting. Because some of these city-states could be quite small. We do know from, say, the demographics of, say, late Bronze, early Iron Age Israel, that some of these, say, city-states had only a few thousand people, if that. Some of them were quite small. A couple of these, several of these were not really, say, even cities. They were more like towns. Towns of like 500 people, 200 people. So 32 Kings sounds impressive. It sounds like overkill, but it might not be. It might not be as impressive as it sounds. Now, I'm going to take just a quick look here at verse 16 just to make sure we didn't miss anything here. And yeah, that's pretty much the context here. So, okay. So anyway, I want to thank you very much for that super chat. Interesting question, because we don't think about. When we think about kings, we think about kings of European powers. King of England, King of France. Kings of Spain. Big imperial powers. No, it was more like, say, King of York or King of Londonville or something like that. Just these tiny towns. That was what they were defining as a king back then. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Andrew Goulet, again for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. I heard that the Babylonians were the first people to divide the day into 60 minutes per hour and 24 hours per day. Why did the system survive down to our own day? Okay. It's actually not quite that simple. Okay. They didn't they had the sexagesimal system. So they're going to divide anything automatically into 60 when it's feasible. Now, the 24-hour day cycle actually doesn't come from Babylon, it comes from Egypt. And that's because Egypt invented the water clock. And Egypt was basically the inventor of, say, the 24-hour day. Now, the 60 minutes per hour, the Babylonians basically were going to take the water clock and they're going to divide it down into, say, 60. Because they divide everything automatically down into 60. That's how they think. So the 60 minutes per hour is definitely something that's within, say, the Babylonian thing. Now, 60 seconds. The term second is actually not a measure of time, it's a measure of geometry. Basically, in, say, the medieval, early modern Europe, people started inventing watches and clocks. And timekeeping finally got granular enough that they needed a division that was smaller than minutes. It's at that point they're going to adapt basically in Europe, they recognize that the 60-minute hour is an extension of geometry. It's an extension of geometry. And it's an extension of geometry that was known, say, in Babylon. It was known in say, Greek geometry. And in early modern Europe, when they are, building clocks for the first time, they're just going to take, they say, the next, circle. They're dividing a circle into 60 minutes. Okay. Then it makes sense to do something very, very similar with the seconds. So take every minute and then do 60 seconds per minute. So this is an outgrowth of geometry on, say, the invention of the clock, the modern clock. So I hope that puts that in context. Is that the Babylonians didn't invent they invented, say, the second in geometry, but not in timekeeping, because they had no way of making it that granular. And you're not going to get that. You're really not going to get that granularity until, say, the medieval period. But they are responsible for 60 minutes per hour. Egyptians for the 24-hour day, and the Europeans for the 60 seconds per minute. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Hey. Our next super chat is from Andrew Goulet for $10. Thank you very much for that super chat. Very much appreciate this. In an earlier video, you said you think the Trojan War was a real event. Yes, I do. When do you think it happened, and what was its cause? I think it happened. I hold to the modern dating of the Trojan War, which is roughly 1260 to 1180 BC. It roughly coincides with, say, the Exodus event and into, say, the conquest period. Okay, so it's roughly in that 80-year time frame where we are going to see that the cause of the Trojan War is really it's a conflict between the Greeks, who are sea peoples. These are the sea peoples. They are basically invading Western Anatolia, just like they're going to invade down the coastal plain of Canaan, and even attempt to invade Egypt. And they're doing it for agricultural reasons, for food. Their populations are growing. They need more food. They don't have enough resources to feed their people. So they're invading Anatolia to capture the agricultural lands to feed their people. And the Trojan War, basically the Trojans are essentially an outpost of Hittites. This is part of the Hittite Empire. The Hittite Empire at this point is falling apart. It's falling apart from both external and internal pressures. Okay? So you're starting to see here the last days of the Hittite Empire. And this is the Trojan War represents that agricultural warfare that's happening between the Greeks and the Hittites that are trying to push the Hittites out of Anatolia to get more agricultural land to feed more people. So that's I hope makes that situation clear. I do think it's a real event. I think most archaeologists today will consider the Trojan War a real event. And interestingly enough, most scholars now think that even, say, the Iliad is a unified composition. So basically a composition by a single author. So a lot of interesting stuff has gone on in, say, studies around the Trojan War in recent times. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. It's a great question. And have a great night. Okay, Cataract 3 for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat, and it's good to see you here tonight. He asks, Did ancient Near Eastern cultures believe rival cultures' gods were accurately described, like Ra being a sun god? Or did they think other nations' gods were evil? Well, okay. It really depends on the culture. Now, most ancient Near Eastern cultures are just going to, how do I say this? They think that they respected and gave deference to the gods of other nations. Okay, so for example, you go into Canaan, some of the Canaanite cities, you see Egyptian statuary there. It's the Egyptian gods, right alongside of Canaanite gods. We know, for example, at Avaris, they were worshipping Baal, Resheph, and Astarte right alongside Egyptian gods like Seth, Osiris, Anubis. We know, for example, when the Hittites invade Babylon, they steal the statue of Marduk and take it back to Hatti. So, it wasn't uncommon for the ancient Near East to basically steal other people's gods, to worship them, sometimes maybe to make mockery of them in some cases. But there was this seemed to be this deference between polytheistic systems in the ancient Near East. Now, as far as rival cultures describing gods, most rival cultures didn't do this. So you're not going to find, say, say Egyptian documents talking about Hittite gods, because that's sort of out of the sphere of their influence. They just didn't care. It's only when the two cultures come into conflict that they're going to like take each other's gods, or in the case of Israelites, the Israelites are going to smash other people's gods, because that's what Israelites did. They're essentially monarchical monotheists. So they're going to go into a Canaanite city and they're going to smash those gods. Other cultures steal them. So they didn't think the gods of other nations were necessarily evil, and they didn't necessarily think they were accurately described. But if they found one that seemed very similar, they might put them right alongside and say, "Oh, synonym for the god." This is what, as I said, like the Egyptians did with Baal. Baal's a storm god. God Seth is a storm god. Same god. So the Egyptians were happy to worship Baal right alongside of Seth, because they thought they was one and the same. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, we got another one here from Andrew Goulet. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he asks, when we read the book of Judges, what verbal clues should we look for to determine if second judges ruled in succession or concurrently in different places? Okay. The ultimate tool of biblical exegesis and analysis: context. Context is everything. If you see the context change and it doesn't say like immediately after or something like that, you can tell that there is that it's probably happening in say concurrently or in parallel. Like, for example, the text will say, and Israel had 40 years of peace. A new ruler, or there was a certain judge arose, and then you can say you see that change in context happen in Judges, and from that you can sort of determine, unless there's an explicit statement of temporal succession in the book of Judges, you always have to be suspicious of say parallel narrative here. Okay, so that's basically how you're going to have to tell this. As I said, though, you can there's multiple contextual flags that will let you know this. Change in place, different are the same tribes being referenced. You'll get small group of tribes, and then a switch over to a single tribe being talked about. That's going to tell you that there are going to be differences in, say, what oppression's happening at what particular time. So is it the same king or is it a different king? You know, if it goes from say oh, somewhere in the south of Shafela and then pops on over to say the tribe of Dan, yeah, you could probably estimate then that there's probably a difference in you know, parallel narrative going on as well. So you got to be always aware of that context. It's context, context, context. And context is going to tell you when there's going to be a switch. So unless you see a temporal marker that sort of clues you that it's an immediate, say, one after the other, think in parallel, because that's, or at least be aware that a parallel narrative could be happening at that point, and then use context to let you know if that's the actual case. So I hope that was helpful. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, and we got a $10 super chat here from John Horton for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Thoughts on the Eruv wires surrounding most of Manhattan? Okay. Well, interestingly enough, Eruv wires are located in a lot of cities. Vancouver here has an Eruv wire. Now, what is an Eruv wire? Okay. It's a modern Jewish attempt to get around the spirit of the law with the letter of the law. What is an Eruv wire? Well, Talmudic law basically says that, upholds the Sabbath. Sabbath, you're not allowed to do any work. But you are allowed to carry things from one room in your house to another. So as long as you're within the four walls of your house, you are allowed to break Sabbath by lifting items. Okay? Now, what is a house? This is where things get hinky. Basically, it is a beam supported by a series of poles. Okay? So, as long as you've got a beam on two poles, that's a wall. Even if there's no actual wall there. And what's a beam here is not defined. So it doesn't have to be a solid beam, it can just be a wire. So a telephone pole works as an Eruv wire. And as long as you have a structure that of these beams and poles that encompass an area, you have created what's called an Eruv area. Basically a place where people don't have to obey the Sabbath on the Sabbath. Jews are then free to carry items anywhere within that Eruv district. Some of these districts are quite massive, like the city of Manhattan. A lot of, say, for example, Vancouver here is surrounded by an Eruv wire, where, say, people are allowed, Jews during the Sabbath are allowed to work and break the Sabbath. So that's what an Eruv wire is. Is basically breaking the spirit of the law with the letter of the law and interpretations thereof. So, so you do find, I mean, it's a very interesting concept. I actually first heard about Eruv wires a few years ago at a lecture. And I was surprised to see that Vancouver had one. I mean, it was very interesting. Because you see this wire, it's not attached to anything. It doesn't conduct electricity. It's just a wire connected to a couple poles. They're making that final link in the wall, as it were. Oh yeah. Existing telephone wires are part of the Eruv system. Yeah, absolutely. My producer asked if they actually use telephone wires for this purpose, and I said absolutely. Yeah, a telephone wire is considered a Eruv wire. So power cables, Eruv wires, or telephone wires, all of that can suffice as an Eruv wire. So making for a surrounding structure of walls where there are no walls. I will have to say this, Orthodox Jews are nothing if not creative with their interpretations. So, anyway, that's my thoughts on the Eruv wire. Thank you very much for the super chat. It's a very interesting concept, though. Very interesting concept. Okay, let's go now to Twidget. Let's see where our next super chat is. I saw that we had several more come in. Go all the way down to Sean Horton. Okay. And he gives us a $20 super chat. Thank you very much for that super chat. Very much appreciated. And he says, thoughts on Old Testament laws being divided into cultural, moral, and cultic. Decent way to categorize the law? Cheap parlor trick to jettison the laws one doesn't like. Well, I think it's a decent way. It's not perfect. No form of categorization of the law is perfect. We do have to understand that when we talk about Old Testament laws, they're a form of basically showing the wisdom of God and the nation. Okay? Yes, there were laws they kept. 10 Commandments, absolutely, they kept all those laws. But there's also a lot of, say, case law, or law that's used as guidance. A lot of these say offenses in the law were supposed to be taken before judges, and the judge was actually supposed to decide the final matter, even in, say, contradiction of the law. So in Israel, judges did have that jurisdiction where they could, essentially judge on their own wisdom if a particular matter was not made clear. So I don't think it's a cheap. I don't think it's a cheap parlor trick to jettison laws one doesn't like. Like, for example, the kosher laws. Kosher laws were meant for ceremonial purposes, for essentially doing the sacrificial system. Even if you did rebuild the temple today, enforcing that law, is going to be very, very difficult. So I don't think it's a cheap way to jettison laws, but it does. We have to be cognizant that laws have context. And for example, like 613 mitzvahot, the ordinances that come out of the law, the 613 mitzvahot are going to be, a lot of them are going to be, like, I think it's 2/3 of them are specific for temples and the tabernacle sacrifices. But we don't have the tabernacle and we don't have the temple. So what are you going to do with them today? When it talks about, don't sacrifice a bull in your at your residence. Well, it's talking about a bull for sacrifice, for burnt offering. Well, no one's doing a burnt offering in their backyard anymore, at least nobody who has all screws tightened anyway. So, there's definitely context here. And I think when we divide these laws into, say, certain categories, we have to, as long as we're doing it, say, within proper context, not a terrible thing to do. Not a terrible thing to do. But it's not always going to be perfect either. So this is one of those things that it's like, yeah, 50, half dozen of one, 6 of the other. So it's not cheap, but it's not. I don't think it is. I also don't think it's a cheap parlor trick. So, because frankly, the law to not wear mixed fabrics, probably not all that relevant anymore. But it served a purpose in its time. Well, that's a bioethical debate. So, but again, it's not a way I don't think it's a way to just jettison laws you don't like, because context is going to tell you an awful lot about which laws are going to remain relevant and which ones aren't. So even if you do categorize it, doesn't necessarily mean you abolish it, or that it was made complete by the works of Jesus Christ. And what I mean by complete is the law is fulfilled, but it still has, say, moral weight. Like, for example, the 10 Commandments still have moral weight, even though Christ is the fulfillment of the law. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. I hope that has shed some light on the question. Okay. Next super chat is from JJP for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Judges 1, 7 to Judges chapter 1, verse 70. 70 kings, Adonai Bezek. Were there really 70 villages and nations? Many places names in Judges 1, but not 70. Okay. Are these 70 kings just head of families? Well, let's just take a quick look. And I think I know the passage anyway, but I just always love to review these things because, so Judges chapter 1, verse 7. We'll pull that up. Okay. All right. And verse 6 here, but Adonai Bezek fled. They pursued him, caught him, and cut off his thumbs and big toes. And Adonai Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and their big toes cut off used to gather up scraps under my table, as I have done. So God has repaid me. So they brought him back to Salem, and he died there. Okay. All right. Jerusalem, actually. But okay. So anyway, what's going on here is that these are essentially they're not heads of families, but they're heads of basically villages. Villages, towns, maybe some big cities. Who knows? Who knows how many he actually conquered? But there were a lot of small villages. A lot of small villages in where he was, and what's the parasites. So this is basically when Judah is taking its inheritance. So the territorial lands of the tribe of Judah. So yeah, it's conceivable there were a lot of small towns. I mean, there were many, many small villages. The fact is that because of the way agriculture worked in the ancient world, people tended to spread out. You know, you go to, say, Middle America today, you know, it's less so today, but in the past, you know, you would find little towns, you know, every few miles, just because it was not convenient to go further afield. So people would tend to gather in, say, smaller towns, but more distributed. And this was no less true for the ancient Near East, and particularly for Israel. So it's conceivable that there would have been 70 towns within a certain area that Adonai Bezek could have conquered and, you know, captured their kings. He could have also done this too. This is also something he could have done, is capture the same town multiple times. You know, basically he had made up. I mean, this happened too, where they would install a ruler, you know, conquer town, install a new ruler, you know, take the old king away. New king, you know, hangs around for a while, then decides to rebel. It happened all the time. Adonai Bezek might just come back and said, "Hey, I left you in charge. You disobeyed me. Now you get to join the old king." And this could have happened on a repeated basis too. So he might have, he might have captured the same town several times, you know, and added to the number of kings, you know, groveling under his table as a result. So we have to be open to that possibility also, that this may not be 70 towns or villages, be less number of towns conquered many times because people rebelled. We do see this happening, for example, when Nebuchadnezzar overthrows the king of Jerusalem, king of Judah, puts a new guy on the throne, goes away, he rebels, and Nebuchadnezzar has to come back and break skulls. So this happens. This happens repeatedly. And this is just part of the perfidious nature of kingship in the ancient Near East. So anyway, I hope that answered your question, or at least shed some light on that question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, Tony G for 999. Thank you very much for the super chat. He says, "Hi, Dr. Falk. What were the grievous infirmities of Egypt which thou knowest, which Moses promised the Lord would spare Israel if they were faithful?" Deuteronomy 7:15. Okay. Quick look at Deuteronomy 7:15. Pretty sure it doesn't say, but we'll just get a little context here anyway. 7:15. "And the Lord will remove from you all sickness, and he will not put you on any of the harmful diseases of Egypt, which you have known, but he will lay them on all who hate you." Okay. Harmful diseases. There are several maladies in Egypt, and we don't have a firm grasp of every sickness that people had in ancient Egypt. But we do know that the Egyptians did suffer from a lot of different diseases, and in some ways more so than other people. Some of this was contamination of the waterways. One of the things I have said on I know I've said this to my classroom when I used to teach history of ancient Egypt. You know, people Herodotus said that Egypt was the Nile's gift. Well, the Nile is also Africa's toilet. Okay? During the inundation, everything from East Africa gets flushed down the Nile, and it's pretty disgusting. Not at all romantic, not in the slightest. It's still a very, very polluted waterway. It's disgusting. You do not ever stick your hand in the Nile. It's just ugh, yuck. Yeah, they tell you even to wash your hands in highly chlorinated bottled water. It's just disgusting, man. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's awful stuff. So, it's I think they've epidemiologists have cataloged something like 50 different parasites in the Nile water. They had intestinal parasites, they had lesions, sores, flies would carry disease. You also had, say, mosquito-borne viruses as well. So these were just some of the day-to-day infirmities and diseases that the Egyptians had. They also had sexually transmitted diseases. Some of that was invariably because of, say, the lifestyle that happened in Egypt. So, we do find, say, for example, even in, say, mummies, we find lots of instances of malnutrition, chronic disease, arthritis, just a baffling array of diseases in some of these people. Remains, as I say, of tapeworms. There's some real disgusting stuff in some of these preserved mummies. So, yeah, it wasn't a disease-free state, not by a long shot. You also had a lot of infections from, say, tooth decay, abscesses. Yeah, a lot of problems with the health of ancient Egyptians. So it's hard to know exactly what this is referring to, but I think it's sort of like a catch bucket of, say, all the plagues, all the diseases. We did know that the Egyptians also suffered from plagues from time to time as well. And it's well documented in, say, Hittite documents where Egyptians came and passed a plague on. So, we're not exactly sure, but we do know some of these were quite serious. So, it's the best we can answer this. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. JPB for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. What's going on with the Ephod garb of the high priest in Gideon in Judges 8:27? Commentaries on Bible Hub seem divided in opinion. All right. Bible again. Looks like we got a bot, hun. So, pages 8. $27. All right. And we will start a little bit back here. Verse 26. Okay, and it says, and the weight of the gold earrings he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, besides the crescent ornaments and pendants and the purple robes which were on the kings of Midian, besides the neckbands which were on their camels' necks. And Gideon made it into an ephod and placed it in his city, Ophrah, and all Israel played the harlot with it there. So it became a snare to Gideon and his household. All right. What is an ephod? An ephod is a vest. And it's a vest that often has a train that goes down covering the loins. So that's what an ephod is in a nutshell. Now, what we find, say, I think there's one of the example of one of these at the Oriental Institute, where, say, a statue of a god is often shown wearing an ephod. Basically, this vest/kilt combo. So, what it is it's a ritual garment. An ephod is a ritual garment. And it's sometimes used as a priest, but is also worn by divinity. So what Gideon has done here is he's made himself a vest, basically a ritual vestment out of all this gold he's gotten. And he puts it on display. He puts it on a display. And it becomes synonymous with the ephods that are part of cultic idolatry. Okay, so this is just more than just a garb of a high priest. Now, the high priest did have an ephod and a garment like this. But in the case of, say, what we see in, for example, in the instructions of the ephod used by the high priest, it's only a small chest plate. Okay, it doesn't go all the way down in the same way you see on cultic signs. This one is probably one of those latter the type that would have been used on, say, the statues of Baal. Because Baal would have worn an ephod like this, that sort of vest kilt combo thing. So we do find that that this is part and parcel to cultic worship. So speaker fell over. So just by having this on display, people are going to presume in that context that this is something that's part of idol worship. Okay? So that's what's happening here in Judges 8:27. Is Gideon is making something he shouldn't be making, which is an ephod, because this is something that only the high priest should be making, or should be wearing. So he's doing something. He's doing something naughty. He's doing something naughty. He's making an ephod for himself. He's not supposed to. Puts it on display, and people just presume this is a new idol. And it would have been a common presumption at that particular time. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that explained it. Very much appreciate it. We got the camel leopard here for $5. Good to see you here tonight, friend. Shabbat shalom. Well, Shabbat shalom to you also. Are fortune cookies a form of divination? Should Christians avoid them? Oh, fortune cookies are yummy. No, they're not a form of divination. At least you shouldn't be using them as a form of divination. I mean, there is that trippy Twilight Zone episode, which shows you the bad side of fortune cookies. You'd have to watch it to know. A food reviewer goes into a restaurant, gives a trash review of the Chinese restaurant, and they gave him a very special fortune cookie. Fortune cookie where the fortune always comes true. And he starts getting dependent on these special fortune cookies. Well, the final fortune cookie says, "You are going to die." Yeah, well, it was a little too late for him to change restaurants at that point. However, they're not a form of divination. No. You're not making any appeal to a god to predict your future. And frankly, a lot of fortune cookies don't even have, say, real fortunes. A lot of them are just like quirky sayings, aphorisms. Like I got one that said, my experience with fortune cookies has not been oh, 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 very ironic. Very ironic. Just before I got my fellowship to study under Kenneth Kitchen, I got a fortune cookie that says that you're gonna move to another city. It's like, so I got into the practice of taping all my fortune cookies that seemed ominous on my monitor. You're gonna have a change in fortune. Oh great, I'm gonna lose my job. Luck's gonna come your way. Oh great, bad luck's coming my way.
They're so general.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, fortune cookies are so general that you can interpret them many different ways, and they're meant to be that way. Yeah, you're gonna meet someone special today. Well, define special. Yeah, I meet too many special people on YouTube. Mm. Yeah, so yeah, I wouldn't worry about fortune cookies. Fortune cookies are not divination, and Christians should not avoid them unless they're on a low carb diet. Um, but don't take them seriously either.
There are some.
Well, yeah, I suppose there are people who do use them as divination, and if you are using them for to figure out your future, then probably avoid them. But it's it's just don't take them seriously. They're not meant to be taken seriously. Like, who puts a serious fortune inside of a cookie anyway? It's just like, well, it's just kind of strange. But yeah, I like fortune cookies. They're very yummy. Okay. Thank you very much for the super chat. It was a fun question. Fun question. Okay, our next super chat is from Sentinel Apologetics. Good to see you tonight, Rob, for $5 Australian. Thank you very much. And he says, "My beautiful daddy Falk." Okay. At Scotch, love you. I get a little too much Scotch. Thoughts on Exodus 25:9. Bruce Wells says it's simply about a scale model of the larger structure. Okay, Exodus 25 is the passage talking about the construction of the tabernacle. Let's go 5:9. Let's see, I'm gonna up here, and it says, "According to all that I'm going to show you as the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all its furniture, Just so you shall construct it. Okay. I don't know exactly what he means here by a scale model of the larger structure. Because after this, it goes right into, say, the construction details of the Ark of the Covenant. Verse 10, and they shall construct an ark of acacia wood, 2.5 cubits long, by 1 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high. So basically, going through the rest of Exodus 25 is going to be the various ordinances for the making of the tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant, the holy vestments. So I don't know how this could be a scale model. I mean, especially not the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant is not a scale model. Because these are actually reasonable dimensions for an ark, simply put. 2.5 cubits long. Okay, well, that 2 is very, very quickly here. I am actually going to use a calculator this time. Try to figure this out of my head, because I'm pretty good with Egyptology. I suck at math. So 18 inches times 2.5 cubits, 45 inches. So you're talking almost 4 feet. So that's a reasonable size for a ritual box. So I don't see how this could be a scale. Perhaps I'm missing something here, or some context here about his interpretation. But I don't think it's a scale model of a larger structure. It's just, I mean, perhaps he's talking about the lid, the mercy seat, as basically a scale model of the throne room of God. But then again, too, the Shekinah glory does still reside between the wings of the cherubim on the mercy seat. So if God is using this in, say, a more interfacing kind of way with the high priest and the nation, well, then is it really a scale model, or is it a model of, I mean, like, for example, every sacred bark in, say, the ancient Near East was a scale model. Sense. But it also served practical purposes. It was the vessel that the god resided in. In the case of, say, a Egyptian sacred bark, the 18-inch statue there was thought to be the real flesh and bone, even though it was metal, of the god himself. In the case of the Ark of the Covenant, the Shekinah glory was physically present between the wings of the cherubim. So they might have been scale models of, say, something bigger like the throne room of God, but they're also, in real terms, how God interfaced with the ancient Israelites. So that's probably all I can say about this at the moment. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And enjoy your scotch. I wish I was drinking scotch right now. Have a great night. Okay. Next super chat is from Cambrit for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Job 33, 22 to 24 sounds like it has a Christological overtones, given that Elihu is one speaking. What do we make of this? Very controversial, this one. Okay, very, very controversial. A lot of... I did a religious studies course once on the Book of Job. Graduate level course. And the interpretation of Elihu is all over the map. The Bible here. And Job 33:22 says, then his soul draws near to the pit, and his life to those who bring death. If there is an angel as a mediator for him, 1 out of 1,000, to remind a man what is right for him, then let him be gracious to him and say, deliver him from going down to the pit I have found a ransom. Now, there are exegetes that do think this is Christological. There are also exegetes out there that think that Elihu is just a young punk bum who's not as wise as the other three. It's really going to depend upon... yeah, exactly. I mean, as I said, it's really controversial. Scholars are all over the map on this one. Okay, they're all over the map. Some think this is Christological. Some think this is, as I said, Elihu is he's the youngest of the four of the comforters, and some people say he's just acting like a dumb kid here. So you know, it's really going to depend upon which exegete you're going to listen to here. I don't have an opinion on this. I really don't have an opinion on this. Because I can see both sides of the argument. I can see the idea that Elihu is saying something very Christological, and that he's almost acting like a type of Christ here. But I also see the other half as well, is that he's basically one-upping his elders, who, you know, basically give rotten advice. Was he right? Was Elihu right to one-up his elders? Was he disrespectful? Should he have been disrespectful? That's a whole different question. Elihu is not condemned, though. That's the other half of this as well. Is the other comforters are condemned. They're basically told that their words are worthless at the end when the Lord finally appears. But Elihu isn't. So, you know, the Lord is silent on the words of Elihu. So we don't know exactly what's happening here. Some have even suspected that Elihu is a Christophany, you know, appearance of the pre-incarnate Christ. As I said, interpreters are all over the map on this one. They're all over the map on this one. So, I will have to bounce this one back to you. I don't have an opinion on this because I haven't studied it recently in enough detail to come to any sort of conclusion on this. And better exegetes than I have wrestled with this passage and, you know, come up with vastly divergent results. So anyway, that's where I'm going to have to leave this one right now. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. It's a good question. It's just not an easy one to answer because there's nothing definitive here to really sort of nail this one down. So, but anyway, thank you very much for the super chat, and it's great to see you here tonight. And I'm glad you were here. Okay, Gnostic Informant for $20. Thank you very much for that generous super chat. Menicius, circa 200 BC, claimed that someone stole a golden ass from Jerusalem temple. Antiochus IV sacked the temple and claimed to have found a similar image. Do you think this is a fabrication or a link to Set, god of the Hyksos? Okay. Well, we do know, say, from Papyrus Salier 1, that the god of the Hyksos was Baal. Almost exclusively was Baal. I do think that some of these, say, Seleucid writers were, how do I say this? They had an ideological agenda. They wanted to control who was the high priest in Jerusalem. You know, once they had conquered, Judah and Jerusalem, they wanted to control who was placed in charge, who was in charge of as a high priest. So, some of this stuff was essentially an attempt to basically say, oh, well, these these filthy Judeans, they're worshiping a donkey. They're not even following their own religion here. They got a golden donkey in the temple. No, 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 they're not doing that sort of thing. But I think I really think this is a fabrication. I think it's a fabrication for ideological purposes. And we do know that the Seleucids were really given to this sort of thing. So, not out of character for the Seleucids. Definitely would not have they would not have brought in an animal. We have to remember, like, for example, in the Book of Kings, when the temple at Samaria is built, they don't use cherubim for their divine imagery. They use bulls as divine images. And the bull has a strong connotation with Baal worship. So, the temple at Jerusalem, people were very, very acutely sensitive to animal imagery being put up in the temple. Very acutely sensitive to it. So sensitive to this that when Herod puts the Roman eagle up on the basically the lintel of the temple, the local population goes absolutely spare. There's almost a riot on their hands because they've got an image of something that flies in the heavens. Now on the temple. The fact that it was a symbol of Roman imperial power was neither here nor there. It was the fact that it was a a graven image as far as they were concerned. So it was just they went nuts. The local priests and the religious Jews went just absolutely nuts over this, and Herod eventually had to take it down. He had to take down the Roman eagle because it was causing too much problems. So I don't think the Israelites would have placed any sort of, say, golden animal inside the temple. This might have been, say, something that, say, Antiochus added or something but it really wasn't something that you would have found in, say at least the precinct of the temple itself. Now, if it was a looted treasure that was maybe in a storehouse near the temple, yeah, it's possible. Okay, but I think at this point, Israel's looting days were far behind them. So I have reasons to doubt this story. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. We've got a very, very generous super chat from Sinaiacus Apologia for $100. Thank you very much again for your generous support of this channel. Without the support that you do, we would not be able to do as much as we can. So we thank you so very, very much for that really, really generous super chat. Very much appreciate this. And he asks, in your opinion, was it the best answer explaining the discrepancy of Yeshua's two genealogies in the Gospel of Matthew and Luke? Okay. Wow. Well, at least it's not as controversial a question as which you did last week to us, dividing us into hot dogs as sandwich versus roll camp. I'm still in the rollist camp on this one. A hot dog is not a sandwich, and I'm going to stand firm upon that. The results of that ecumenical council. Okay. Now, as to the discrepancies of the genealogies in Matthew and Luke, I have not looked at those genealogies close enough to really evaluate what's going on there. But I will give you some sort of guiding principles here. Now, I'm always very, very careful about any work I do with genealogies. Very careful. I have found that there are both a lot of tricks and traps to interpreting genealogies. Genealogies are not just done to show pedigree. They're not just shown to show your history. It's to show the fruit of a previous ancestor. So it's more forward-looking than backwards-looking. To show posterity is another way of saying this. What's the posterity of a certain person's actions? So and in some respects, genealogies have as I've studied genealogies, I have noticed that many of them serve purposes that are not intuitive on the surface. Like, for example, the genealogy of Uzzah, where it's when he gets, struck dead when he touches the Ark of the Covenant. There's a small genealogy at the beginning of that passage. And that basically, genealogy is a sort of a way of telling you that Uzzah was King David's nephew. Okay? King David was putting his nephews his Judahites, essentially Judahites, to carry the Ark of the Covenant, which was absolutely forbidden. You do have, say, like, I think it's First Chronicles, I think it's 19. Chronicles. Okay, it's First Chronicles 6. You get a genealogy for Haman the singer, and it looks on first blush that it's actually a genealogy pointing back to the descendants of Levi, of the tribe of Levi. But you look at it much closer, you really discover that it's two genealogies that's being grafted together. Because Haman, his ancestors, are actually Ephraimites. So what it is, the genealogy is doing, is making the posterity of Samuel honorary Levites so they can continue to serve in the temple. Because only Levites are allowed to serve in the temple. So it's a way of grandfathering Samuel, the Ephraimites, posterity, into the Levites, making them honorary Levites so they can continue to serve in the temple. Okay? So here's another example of a genealogy that's doing something very, very different than what you would expect a genealogy to do. It's something completely different. So I'm reticent to make any firm statements on what's happening in Matthew and Luke. On one hand, it is the genealogies are showing say that Jesus Christ is on the branch of King David. But I also haven't looked at this carefully enough to see, what is the genealogy? I mean, we know, for example, in one of those genealogies, I think it's Matthew's genealogy, we have gametria. We have 14 descendants, followed by 14 descendants, followed by 14 descendants, or 14 ancestors, followed by 14 ancestors, by 14 ancestors. Okay? So that's gametria. Now, when you see gametria being invoked in a biblical text, you also have to think, okay, that's trying to show, say, perfection, or that this is the proper time for Messiah to appear. but it's sort of also ad hoc too. So I want to be very careful even with that. So I'm gonna be basically saying that I think what we need to do when I do finally get around to really studying Matthew and Luke, and this is going to be part of a bigger study when in my copious free time. When I do finally look at this issue, I'm going to be looking at what is the purpose of these particular genealogies. What are they trying to convey? Find out what is the overarching message of this. Because almost every genealogy I've come across so far is trying to show us an overarching message, not just tell us what the ancestors were. Okay? So I know that doesn't help because we didn't go into the details of the discrepancies. But it's not just one genealogy either. So we're just having to really sort of going to have to parse those and see what each genealogy is trying to accomplish. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. A very, very generous super chat. Very much appreciated. And I'm going to have to just defer that question until I get some time to really, really study this one closely, because it's special material that does require an extra special consideration. So thank you very much for the super chat. It's great to have you here tonight. It's a good question, and I wish I had a better answer for you. But it's, again, one of those things that, I'd rather be cautious here than give you a flippant answer that it will be wrong. So I very much appreciate it. Thank you very much. Have a great, great night. I'm glad to see you here tonight. Okay, we got mouthwash here for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Did Pharisees of the New Testament time believe the traditions to be direct from Moses? When did the traditions of the elders become the oral law? Okay. Let's answer the second one first. The traditions of the elders becoming the oral law happened during the rabbinic period. So essentially, the oral law begins after the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. And really with the Bar Kokhba revolt, and Jerusalem is destroyed in its entirety, and essentially the survivors have to leave town. And basically you start getting small groups of rabbis that are going to come together and go, well, temple's destroyed, what do we do now? I mean, the Sadducees are all out of a job at this point. I mean, the Sadducees, that's your temple cult. Those are your temple priests. Okay? They're out of a job. They're no longer relevant at all. Okay? So they're completely off the picture at this point. The Pharisees are going to start penning down the oral traditions. Okay? And this is where you're going to start getting, say, the rabbinic sages who start writing the Talmud, the Mishnah, the Seder Olam, all those, say, post-Jerusalem destruction books. So basically, this becomes the oral law that's written down. Okay? So that's when those traditions start being put to pen. And they start happening roughly around, say, 150, 200 AD. And they will continue to be written down until at least around, say, 500 AD. Now, your first question, did the Pharisees in the New Testament time believe the traditions to be direct from Moses? Not necessarily the oral law, because the oral law is a set of interpretations of the Torah law. So, Pharisees in the New Testament time did not necessarily believe that the traditional interpretations, were direct from Moses, because they knew very well that several rabbis disagreed. Exegetes could disagree from the various schools of, say, Israelite interpretive tradition. So oral law did not have, the same impact, the same gravitas that the written law had. But they also believed, many of them did believe that, say, the Torah, the Pentateuch, was direct from Moses. Now, will they believe that all of it is direct from Moses? We don't know. We don't have that information. But it is the case that they definitely believe that, say, a vast majority of the Torah was direct from Moses. Even they even considered Genesis to be directly from Moses. So, I think it's clear that the Pharisees in the New Testament period had that belief. Now, what did they do with the last chapter of Deuteronomy? We don't know. We don't have comments from that period to say one or the other. We're just not sure of how extensive that belief was. Did they believe all of it was from Moses' pen, or did they believe parts of it were passed down? We're just not sure. Not sure. It's hard to know sometimes what people believe in a specific period when they don't leave us enough writings about what was going on in their heads. And this is true of all historical times and disciplines. Sometimes we just don't know the motivations or the beliefs of certain people because they didn't write them down. And when we do get them written down, we're lucky and we consider ourselves really, really fortunate, because then we got something to base these analyses on. Yeah. And that's the other thing my producer points out here, that it's incorrect to ascribe a interpretation to them that they may or may not have actually held. You can give probabilities. We can say here that, for example, in the case of the Torah, the probability is exceptionally high that they believed it was direct from Moses. The oral law, almost certainly not. Probability is equally high that, say, the traditions of the elders did not come direct from Moses. And Pharisees, even in their time, believed that. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, we've got another one from Camel Leopard for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he says, back to enjoy the rest of the stream. Well, welcome back. Hope you enjoyed my silly cookie question. Oh, I loved it. I did like it. But I do like fortune cookies too, so, it was double win. And he asks, what relation did Moshe have to Ramses? He is usually depicted as having a brotherly relationship with him. Probably not. Okay. Let's be sort of clear of what the relationship was. Ramses would have been raised in the royal household. Okay. The Ramesside clan came to power after the death of Horemheb. After the death of Horemheb, Ramses I ascends the throne. Okay, he's a general before. He's governor at Avaris. Okay, so he's the vizier. Ramses I is vizier of Avaris before he becomes king. So he's the vizier. He's the named successor of Horemheb. And he has an instant dynasty. He's already a grandparent. Ramses I is already a grandparent when he becomes king. He lives for 1 or 2 years, and then Seti I comes to the throne, reigns for 11 to 15 years, and then Ramses II becomes king. Ramses II is already alive when Ramses I comes to the throne. Now, Ramses I is governor at Avaris for a long time and has a very large family. Very large family. Ramses II has spent some time, as a child at Avaris. He probably doesn't leave Avaris until he's like 10 or 12. So he grows up at Avaris. And that's because, he was alive before the Ramesside clan gained the royal status of being royals. Okay. So what happens is, either the daughter of Ramses I or the daughter of Seti I, before Ramses I becomes king, adopts Moses as a child. The punishment, the killing of the innocents, basically when Pharaoh commands that all the male children be killed and thrown in the river. That doesn't happen until probably around the reign of King Ai. That's about 20 years prior to the elevation of Ramses I. So what happens is, one of the daughter of probably Ramses I, possibly Seti I. They're not king yet. They're not in the royal family yet. Those daughters still have the prerogative to adopt children on their own initiative. Now, this is one of the things about women in Egypt. Women had an almost unquestioned right to adopt children on their own initiative. A husband could not tell a wife she could not adopt a child. A father could not tell a daughter not to adopt a child. The only exception to this was the daughter of a king. Daughters of kings were not allowed to marry on their own initiative. They're not allowed to adopt on their own initiative. And that's because you're introducing strange people into the royal household. People being introduced into the royal household had to be vetted. But Ramses I wasn't a king yet. So his daughter still had the right to adopt on her own initiative. So what happens is, she adopts Moses on her own initiative, and he starts, growing up in the household of Ramses I as governor of Avaris. Okay, he's going to be roughly in his how would I say this? Late teens. He's going to be in his late teens when Ramses II is born. Okay. There's not going to be a whole lot of playtime between the two. Okay. Okay. It's just, it's not just, it's just not happening. Okay. There's too big of an age difference between the two. Okay. So at that point, Moses, because when Ramses I is elevated to the throne, all his children then become sons of a king, his natural children. All his natural daughters become daughters of a king. Adopted children don't receive that same privilege. But as the son of a daughter of a king, Moses has one right, and only one right, which is he can demand a royal audience. But this is something that almost happens retroactively. Moses is aware and does know Ramses II personally before he flees Egypt, because he grew up in the same household. Okay, but he hasn't known Ramses as king, because the Ramessides aren't in power when Moses has to flee Egypt. So he doesn't know yet he's going to be the son of a daughter of a king. He finds this out when he comes back. Or he might find out in Midian. Someone might tell him in Midian. But this happens after he leaves. But when he comes back, he's well aware that he still has this right of an audience. So that's sort of the relationship. It's a distant relationship. It's not a close relationship. They are growing up in, say, the same sort of circles, in that there's a say, scribal training school at Horus. Ramses is going to be taught how to read, write. So is Moses. He's going to be taught to read and write. It's good. It's what they call the royal Koth. And they're going to both learn of the wisdom of Egypt, but not exactly at the same time. Because Moses is probably at least a decade older than Ramses II. So, yeah, I don't think it's a brotherly relationship, not at all. Ramses would have been trained as a soldier. He would have had military training. Moses probably wouldn't have. He probably would have been shuffled off into the scribal profession, which is why he was out on the work site to begin with. Because overseers, scribes, always went out to, say, the work sites to check upon the workers. It's probably why Moses was out there to begin with. So, anyway, thank you very much for the question. I hope that explains the relationship between Moshe and Ramses II. It's a complicated relationship, and it changes. It changes with the changing circumstances of the Ramesside clan. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. It's a very, very interesting question, and you can see that there's some parts here. So thank you very much for the super chat, and have a great night. Okay. JHPP for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Judges 8:5-9 and 8:13-17. Why does Gideon kill men of Peniel and not Sukkoth? What when the offense is similar? He didn't promise to kill anyone in either case. Well, let's take a look at that, because I'm not sure. So, let's see if we can figure it out. So, Judges, chapter 8. Okay. Verse 1. Then the men of Ephraim said to him, "What is this thing you have done to us, not calling us to fight against Midian?" And they contended with him vigorously. But he said, "What have I done now in comparison with you? Is not gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abiezer? God has given the leaders of Midian, Oreb, and Zeb in your hands, and what was I able to do in comparison to you?" So he attacks their pride. Then their anger subsided when he said that. Gideon and 300 men who were with him came to Jordan and crossed over, weary yet pursuing. And he said to the men of Sukkoth, okay, "Please give us loaves of bread to the people who are following me, for they are weary, and I am pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, kings of Midian." And the leaders of Sukkoth said, "Are the hands of Zebah and Zebah already in your hand, that we should give bread to your army?" And Gideon said, "All right, when the Lord has given Zebah and Zalmunna in my hand, I will thrash your bodies with thorns of the wilderness and with briars." Okay, so 8-7 and 5-9. He went up from there to Penuel and spoke similarly to them, and the men of Penuel answered him just as the men of Sukkot had answered. So when he spoke also to the men of Penuel, saying, "When I return safely, I will tear down this tower." That's now verse 10. Now Zebah and Zebah were in Karkar, their armies with them, about 15,000 men. All who were left the army of the sons of the east for fallen were 120,000 swordsmen. Gideon went up by the way of those who lived in the tents east of Nobah and Jebagah, and attacked the camp, and the camp was unsuspecting. When Zebah and Zalmunna fled, he pursued and captured the two kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and routed the whole army. Then Gideon's son of Joash returned from the battle by ascent of Horus. And he captured a youth from Sukkot and questioned him. Then the youth wrote down for him the prince of Sukkoth and his elders, 77 men. And he came to the men of Sukkoth and said, Behold, Zebah and Zemla, concerning whom you taunted me, saying, Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give bread to your men? Essentially, what's happening here is Sukkoth is not going to give Gideon men, because he isn't going to give Gideon men bread or rations, because the men of Sukkoth doubt Gideon's ability to actually pull off this deed. Essentially, to rout the men of Midian. But he also gets information too. The youth is basically given him the leaders. Verse 16, and he took the elders of the city and the thorns of the wilderness and briars, and he disciplined the men of Sukkoth in front of them. So he gets some vengeance here. And verse 17, and he tore down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of the city. Then he said to Zebah and Zalmunna, What kind of men were they who you killed at Tabor? And they said, They were like you, each one resembling the son of a king. Now, in both cases, both the men of Penuel and the men of Sukkoth are basically not being helpful. Gideon is pursuing these kings of Midian, and they're just not getting any assistance from the basically their brothers. So why does essentially one react one way and one react the other way? Well, essentially it's this. It sounds like, and this might be speculation, so do take this with a proverbial grain of salt. It sounds like the men of Sukkoth handed their elders over. Okay? So what you had here is one town resisting Gideon, the other one not. We see this in, for example, so he tells the first town, Sukkoth, okay, you're not going to give us provisions for this little campaign. We're going to come back and we're going to whip you with briars and thorns. Okay. And let's see, does he promise that just to the elders previously, or does he promise it to the whole? Yeah. Okay. So that's what's going on here. The fate is actually promised to all the men of, say, Sukkoth. Okay, so when the Lord is given in verse 7, and Zimlah into my hand, I will then thrash your bodies and thorns in the wilderness with briars. Then Penuel verse 8, Penuel, and spoke similarly to them, and the men of Penuel answered him just as the men of Sukkoth had answered. So both towns are reacting the same way initially. Then the tables turn, and then in verse 14, and he captured a youth from Sukkoth and questioned him. Then the youth wrote down for him the princes of Sukkoth and his elders, 77 men. So, if the other men of Sukkoth are like this youth, even though both towns responded initially the same, they're going to react in a very different way. It sounds like what happens is in Sukkoth, the normal people go, hey, these elders, you take them. They wrote checks. Their mouths were writing checks their bodies couldn't cash. We're done. Take them out. Whip them all you want. So it sounds like the sort of the people said, yeah, we don't have much loyalty to these guys. And Gideon's fine with that. Gideon's not going to whip everyone with briars if he can just, get the responsible parties. Penuel looks a little different in that he's not going to exact say punishment on, say, just the leadership if all the men are reacting the same way. So he tears down the tower, the men probably defending the tower, and he kills all the men. Okay? And we do have to be clear here, too, that it is Ish, men of the city. So he's not killing everyone in the city. He's just killing the men. Women and children survive this. Okay? They're innocent parties. So that's what's here is happening, is both of those towns are Sukkoth and Penuel are reacting similarly initially. It's what's happening in the aftermath that's slightly different. One sells out their leadership. The other one bans to sort of save the tower and reaps the consequences of that. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate that. It's an interesting question, and I said there is a little speculation here, but we have to sort of exegete the text to try to figure out why there is a difference here. Okay. The camel leopard for $5. Thank you very much for that super chat. Very much appreciated. He asks, I have been considering attending a local messianic Jewish congregation. How should I avoid being that Gentile? Great question. Wow, that is a great question. 10 points to the camel leopard for asking the best question of the night. I worked as the administrative assistant in a messianic Jewish congregation. Okay. I answered the phones. I did their database programming for them. Absolutely loved being part of that congregation. But sure enough, we had that Gentile in the pews. How do you identify that Gentile? He's the guy wearing the prayer shawl, the uncut braids down the side of his head, the tzitzit that's the size of a dinner plate. He's wearing a robe with tassels all the way to his feet, covering his feet. He's that Gentile. He's got a shofar slung over his shoulder, side of his waist. That's the goy. Okay. How to be that Gentile? How not to be that Gentile? How should you avoid being that Gentile? Act normally. Okay? Don't try to follow the kosher laws. They're not for you. And it's debatable if they're for even, say, modern Israelites, modern Jews. That law has been covered by the blood of Jesus Christ. Look, I mean, yeah, but be sensitive, because there will be Jews in your congregation that have not converted, that are not messianic. They're there maybe for their wives, or their spouse. They're not Christian yet. They're still following the kosher laws. Okay. At potlucks, don't bring pork. Don't bring shrimp. Okay. Keep your meats and cheeses separate. Okay. Follow the kosher laws when you bring stuff to a potluck. Okay. Don't dress up all Jewish. don't do it. Just don't do it. You know, you're not Jewish, so don't pretend to be Jewish. If you want to bring a prayer shawl, that's okay. Um, if you're doing it out of respect, like for example, if you're asked to read the Torah scroll because you happen to know Hebrew, Gentiles are allowed to read the Torah scroll. I was allowed to read the Torah scroll. They asked me to wear a prayer shawl when I read the Torah scroll. Absolutely cool. Respecting the customs all the way. I'm not wearing a tzitzit because I wasn't bar mitzvahed. So I respected the custom and the limits of those customs. Okay? But you can always tell that Gentile. He's the one in the audience who's dressed up like he fell off the wagon from 40 AD. You know, he's that guy. He looks like he looks like he's in a movie costume. And every sort of say traditional congregation has this. If you're in an ethnic congregation, you get these sort of guys who say cosplay the culture. These guys are cosplaying being Jewish. You'll get a lot more respect just dressing normal. Dress in a nice button-up shirt and pants. Just like you would go to a business meeting. That's how you be respectful, and that's how you avoid being that Gentile. Messianic Jewish congregations are fantastic. They're wonderful, especially the ones that have really embraced the grace of Jesus Christ. I consider themselves brothers in Christ. I consider them brothers in Christ. My time at the Messianic Jewish congregation was wonderful. I don't regret a minute of it. It was how offensive AM/FM. I see the chat there, and okay. How offensive is it? It can be quite offensive. It can be quite. Yeah, they'll usually just laugh at you. Okay. Yeah. Sometimes they'll laugh to your face, but they'll think you're weird. They'll think you're a caricature. Yeah, they know you're cosplaying. So, they're not going to respect that. So, just be respectful. Be normal. Yeah. Well, I mean, my producer brings up a good point that if you decide to learn Hebrew, they'll respect that. Okay, because frankly, a lot of Messianic Jews don't know Hebrew. It was actually quite amazing to me how few people in the congregation could actually read Hebrew. We had 4 readers in our congregation who could read Hebrew. Read it enough to read a Torah scroll. And actually, one of them cheated. He put a transliteration inside the Torah scroll the night before. So to cheat, because he couldn't actually read the Hebrew characters anymore. So yeah, he cheated. I didn't have to cheat. But you'll find that if you can read Hebrew, that you'll be people will sort of tap you on the shoulder and ask you to read the Torah scroll. And nothing wrong with a Gentile doing that. You're not being that Gentile by reading the Torah scroll. You're being that Gentile if you fake it and you cosplay it. So I think this is an excellent question to ask. I think more people should ask this before getting involved with a Messianic Jewish congregation. It's absolutely the right question to ask. It is absolutely the right question to ask, and you can figure out in almost any Messianic Jewish congregation which Gentile that is. When I was answering the phones at the Olive Tree congregation that I served in, it would always be around Passover time. I get the Gentiles calling up and going, I haven't cleaned my house of mold and leaven. Am I in trouble now? No, no, I didn't eat unleavened bread 7 days before the festival. What do I do? Eat food? Oh! I just read in the Bible that shrimp is disgusting. I shouldn't eat it. Did you enjoy the shrimp? And these were all calls from Gentiles. These weren't calls from Jews. The Jews weren't calling up the church and asking about the kosher laws or the ceremonial laws. It was all Gentiles. It was all the Gentiles that were worked up about this. We had Jews in our congregation that ate bacon and those that didn't. We had those that ate shrimp and those that didn't. So you know, yeah, I mean, a lot of them just never grew up with this food, so they thought it was just disgusting. There was one guy who grew up not eating bacon, and for him, he couldn't even stand the smell of bacon. Another guy, thought that eating shrimp was like eating insects, so he didn't do it. Even though locusts are kosher and permitted. Yeah, Pastor Dan's wife thought that lobster were sea bugs. I, however, have a different opinion of lobster. I like lobster. Lobster's delicious. So is shrimp and bacon. Okay, so, but you do have Jews on both sides. Modern Jews, don't necessarily keep kosher, and modern Messianic Jews are the same way. Some will, some won't. Just don't bring it to the potlucks. Okay? Keep your potlucks absolutely kosher. Okay, and because you'll get people who not knowing, they'll bring like hot dogs, non-kosher hot dogs, to a potluck. Have pork in it. That's just not going to fly. That's really an awful thing to do. So just be considerate, be normal. Anyway, thank you very much for this super chat. Very much appreciate it, and it's a great question. Excellent question. Okay. Camel Leopard again for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Why is Pascha, Easter, celebrated strictly on a Sunday rather than a set calendar date? I never get the formula for calculating Easter correct. It's based on a lunar calculation of some kind, and it is celebrated. Pesach and Easter are actually not always on the same day. Okay, Pesach can be on a different day other than Easter. Now, Easter is celebrated on a Sunday because that's the day that the Lord Jesus Christ was resurrected from the dead. That's when he rises from the dead. Okay, so that is why. Easter is always celebrated on a Sunday, because that's the day Jesus Christ rose again from the dead. Pesach, or basically the Passover, is celebrated on in accordance with the Jewish calendar. Okay, and that's not always on a Sunday. It's not always on a Sunday. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. Okay, now certain certain liturgical calendars are going to calculate Easter in a very, very different way. Like, for example, in the Western calculation in the Western liturgical calendar, Easter, which is part of a lunar calculation, and I don't remember exactly what the calculation is, so I'm not going to even try to recite it. It's quite complicated. But it's the first Sunday after a certain full moon, I think. But it does have the possibility of landing on the same day as Passover, and that's happened a few times, where Passover and Easter fall on the same day. Now, in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, if that happens, Easter is set for this next Sunday after Passover. Okay, so they try to correlate their Passover their Easter to take place after, say, the Jewish Passover. Um, so this is again going to depend upon what religious tradition you're talking about. Each religious tradition is going to calculate it differently, whether it's, say, the Jewish Passover, whether it's the Western Easter or the Eastern Easter. So each one's going to be different here, and it's got its own ways of actually calculating them. But again, in the case of, say, the Christian traditions, it's because it's on Sunday because that's the day the Lord Jesus Christ rose again from the dead. So anyway, thank you very much for that super chat. Very much appreciated, and it's a good question. Yes, locusts are kosher. What? Mayonnaise. Yes, mayonnaise is kosher. It's egg, oil, spices, vinegar, or lemon juice. Yeah, all that's kosher. So yes, mayonnaise is kosher. Yeah, we'll talk. Let's talk about the kosher salt. Okay, let's talk about kosher salt because that's actually kind of an interesting question. Um, Kosher salt is not kosher. It's actually short for koshering salt. Kosher is the process that the salt is used in. Okay, so here's what you have. You have a piece of meat. I'm not sure if there's blood in it. So what you do is you take some salt. You use this very flaky salt in a process called koshering. You cover the meat with the salt, and the salt extracts all the liquid out, or a lot of liquid out of the meat. They think it's blood. What it really is myoglobin. Okay? So it's not the salt that's kosher, it's the process that's kosher that the salt is used in. So it's kosher for use in food, but that's because any salt is practically kosher for use in food. But in the particular koshering process, you want a special salt here that doesn't have iodine, because that'll leave an off taste to the meat. You could use iodized salt for this process, but it won't taste right. It won't taste the same, and it won't draw out the liquid in the same way that koshering salt will do. So that's why you use kosher salt. It's, again, not that the salt itself is kosher, but it's used in the koshering process, which very few people do these days. Does this relate to pickles? You can use kosher salt in pickles too. You can also use pickle salt. Well, all pickles are technically kosher, I think. I don't think there's any non-kosher pickles. Uh, Pickles are generally kosher. Okay. We got another one from the Camel Leopard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. My grandma would like to know, if Moshe didn't part the Red Sea, why couldn't they just go around the Yam Suf? Okay. Because it's big. That's why. Our bot's back. We have to understand that the Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds, is part of a massive estuary. It's part of a massive estuary at the termination of the Pelusiac branch of the Nile, where the Nile sort of leads into a bay and out into the Mediterranean. Okay, the Yam Suf was big. It was really big. It was thousands of square miles. Thousands of square miles. Now, it's not terribly deep. It's only about 20 to 40 feet deep, but it's very wide. Very wide. The reason they couldn't just go around the Yam Suf is because they were boxed in. Okay? They were between Balsafon, Pihahirot, Migdol, and the sea. Oh, and the wilderness. Okay? So, anyway, you have there when Pharaoh's army actually catches up to Moses, they're actually dead right on him. They're dead to rights. Okay. The only thing that's keeping the two camps apart is that pillar of cloud and fire. The chariots of Pharaoh get there. Okay, get there as basically, Israel has set up camp for the night. So Israel set up camp for the night. The chariots arrive, and then you've got this pillar of fire that stops them. Then the sea parts. The wind from the east comes and parts the sea, and then the Israelites make their escape through the parted waters. The pillar subsides, and then Pharaoh follows. Essentially, if they had tried to go around the lake, essentially, as soon as that pillar had lifted up, they would have been right on top of them. A chariot corps could easily outrun people on foot, easily. They couldn't just go around. That wasn't an option. The fact is that the question is not could they have gone around the Yam Suf. They couldn't. The real question is why did they go up there in the first place? Okay, and again, it seems that the Bible has basically said that the reason why God directed, because they're leaving Egypt out of the Wadi Tumalat, but instead of going south, they go north. They go north, along the southern edge of the Yam Suf, and into those areas of Balsaphon, Pihahirot, and Migdol, and they're sort of wandering there as a sort of a lure to draw Pharaoh's chariots in. It's a trap. Solo, it's a trap. Yeah, it's exactly what it is. It's a trap. It's a trap that Yahweh has laid out for Pharaoh's army, his chariots. So, and it looks like they've got him dead to rights. Chariots are gonna come in, wipe out some Israelites, and then eventually the infantry is gonna come by and pick up those stragglers. So that's why they couldn't just go around. They couldn't outrun the chariots at that point. Just no way to do it. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. This is really because the Israelites are baiting. They're baiting Pharaoh's chariots, and they're the bait in the trap. The chariots just didn't know it, and probably the Israelites didn't either. To be honest, convincing bait often doesn't know it's the bait. That's what makes it convincing, yeah. So, So if Moses didn't part the Dead Sea, they were dead, essentially. They couldn't have run fast enough without the parting of the Red Sea to make this to spring the trap. They were done. They were finished. Okay. And she also had a follow-up question. I think that was the last super chat of the night. Yeah, that was. Okay, so that's the last super chat of the night. So we're going to take some non-super chats at this point. We're almost at the 3-hour mark, so we won't be taking very many. Camel Leopard has a follow-up question. He has a follow-up question. Well, wonderful. Does she watch this show? Or are you relaying the answers to her? Just curious. You don't. If she doesn't watch, that's okay. But I just am curious. We don't get many grandmothers watching our show, so it would be very cool if she did. But okay. So anyway, she asks. She had a follow-up question. Why don't we find chariots or any evidence there? Okay, it's very simple. They're made of wood and leather. Very, very simple. Wood and leather. We wouldn't expect to find any remains of a chariot. Okay. Stretched leather does not react well to getting wet. It rots really, really quickly. It falls apart. And that's what you'd find is if the chariots go into the drink like that, they're going to get smashed around. The leather's going to rot. The wood's going to rot. The bodies are going to be eaten by crocodiles. The fish are going to pick the bones. All that's going to be washed downstream into, we have to remember this is still an estuary, so it's flowing water. So all that's going to eventually be washed downstream into the bay. So I wouldn't expect there to be much. There's a small amount of bronze fittings on a chariot, but not very much. Like, say, the axle component may be made of bronze, but that's about all. That's about the only metal you find on a chariot, is that axle component. The rest of it is all made out of wood and leather. And wood and leather rot really, really fast. So that's why we won't find any evidence of chariots there, because they just wouldn't survive. It just doesn't survive. You drop your wallet into the ocean, it's not going to survive either. The credit cards will survive. The plastic money inside might survive. Some of the coins might survive, but the wallet itself will rot away. So, anyway, unless made of plastic also, but okay, but real leather wallet is not going to survive. So anyway, thank you very much for that additional question. It's an interesting question, of course. So, people do ask, why don't we find evidence of the chariots? Because they're ephemeral. Comes down right to it. They're ephemeral objects. They don't survive those conditions at all. Funny? Thank you very much for the question. All right, let's take some more questions here. For creation, how deep and wide was the Sea of Reeds? How wide? Hundreds of miles. Hundreds of miles wide. How deep? About 20 to 40 feet. We can estimate that from the sediment deposits that we find there today. And there's actually been quite a lot of geological surveys done there. And that's because a lot of that area there was a channel cut for the Suez Canal. So we do know the actual sedimentation of that area quite well. So we know approximately how deep it was and how far it extended. So hundreds of miles wide, 20 to 40 feet deep. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Okay. The MRB asks, if the wind from God's Nessings blew from the east, okay, from the east, does that mean the split was north, east, west, and southeast? Would they have been able to fight the hurricane force winds? Okay, From the scientific papers that we have on wind set downs, and that's really what this is. We do find that in the Eastern Nile that we have this phenomenon called a wind set down, where a wind will blow, particularly from the east, and it will move part water. Okay? I mean, this stuff is these winds are so strong, can be so strong and focused that we've even seen, say, the elevation of the Mediterranean locally drop by about 4 feet. So that's a lot of force. That's a lot of force. So the split of the water is basically going east to west. Okay, so they're almost doubling back around the backside of the sea reeds, and then coming back out. Okay, so they're coming in from the south. The sea is parted on the southeastern side. They go across to the basically the southwestern side, and then come back down into the wilderness of Pithom. Okay, so now for a lake about 20 to 40 feet deep, you actually don't need that forceful wind. It can be accomplished in about a wind speed that's about 50 miles an hour. Now, that's a good strong wind. That's a very strong wind. It's not a hurricane force wind. So, it's sort of on that sort of cusp between a good storm and say and a hurricane, but it's not quite hurricane. It's not throwing stuff about all over the place. But it's interesting too that we do find that this parting of the sea by the wind is concurrent with other meteorological events that are happening at the same time, like the pillar of fire and cloud. That's a meteorological event. We are told it's the Lord leading, the angel of the Lord leading them. So there is some sort of divine presence there, but it's divine presence that's manifesting via meteorological event. So we do see that these events are often related. Before a hurricane will set in, there's often tornadoes. So it's not unusual or dark clouds in the sky that one meteorological event will then lead to another. So the miraculous portion of this is the timing here. But what we're seeing here is that that it is from the east. The text tells us it's from the east, and that the split is probably going from east to west, and probably southeast to southwest. So anyway, again, now it doesn't require that much force of a wind. About, as I say, about 50 miles an hour is all it needs. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. It's an interesting question. Let's see if I got that. I'll take this question from Ekatanki Stalinist. I was reading the book of Samuel and didn't encounter any Yahwistic names, but instead El, and Baal names. Did David and Saul have sons with Baal names, but no Yahwistic? Is there any reason for this? There's some reasons for this. Style, fashion. You do find that as the nations sort of fell into idolatry, it tended to revert back to more Baal and El names. So, this is, we have to kind of understand that the time of the United Monarchy is coming off of a period of, say, people falling away during the time of the judges. Okay? We're told in, say, the book of Judges at the end where the last judge is Samson. Terrible judge. Terrible judge. And for Samuel, and First and 2nd Samuel, that the people are disobedient at this point. They're hard-hearted. They want to do their own thing. So we're starting to see again the nation fall into idolatry. So we wouldn't expect a large amount of Yahweh names as, say, people are falling into, this sort of patterns. When we find that the Baal and idolatrous worship is so bad at one point that the number of Yahweh worshippers in all of Israel is reduced to only a few thousand. It was 7,000 faithful. That's not very much, for what's presumed to be the religion of Israel. So yeah, they're not going to be naming their kids after, Yahweh. They're going to be naming them after Baal and El. So that's the reason. Some of their sons will be named. El is used of Yahweh, and maybe those who were worshiping of Yahweh preferred the ambiguity of, say, El names. Again, a lot of this is style. A lot of this is, fashion of the period. A lot of this is just the nature of the culture at the time. So that's probably the reason right there. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Marie says, well, I had no idea that where they crossed it was only about 50 feet deep. I thought it was hundreds of feet deep. I blame Ron Wyatt. I must be still thinking too far south. Yeah, blame Ron Wyatt. Well, I did the calculations for the crossing at the Nuiba. If you took the Bible seriously and that wind parted the waters, and that the depth at the Nuiba crossing is 800 meters, that's 2,400 feet down. I calculated that the wind pressure needed to do that parting was 3,000 kilometers an hour. That's a wind speed that has never happened on this planet. You couldn't survive it even if you were down there. The winds on Jupiter aren't that fast. Okay. Okay. It's just wow. Yeah, that's not happening. Not happening. The waters are not going to be parted by a wind if the depth of the water is 2,400 feet. It just isn't going to happen. So, it's just like, yeah, no, that's not happening. But, 20 to 40 feet, that's reasonable. That can be done by a wind. And it's a wind that a person can even walk in. So, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense if you really sort of take the Bible on its own merits. Well, they're walking with their backs to the wind. It's blowing them forward. Yeah. Yeah, you'd actually go faster. Whereas if you had to cross by the Nuiba, you're actually walking against the wind. Yeah. So yeah, it does matter. It makes a real difference. Okay, let's see some other questions here. AMFN asks, you've talked about Continental young Earth creationism in the past. What are some resources to look into this? Very hard. I don't have any resources for you on this, honestly. They tend to be more. They're not like American young Earth creationists. They don't run their own publishing houses. They don't really. They're not really into, say, how do I put this? American young Earth creationism is very evangelical. And what I mean by that is they tend to want to spread the message of American young Earth creationism. So they are big on lectures. They're big on conferences. They're big on theme parks. They're big on publishing houses and free literature and giving away DVDs. And they want to get the message of young Earth creation out there. Continental young Earth creationism isn't like that. It tends to be sort of a niche thing you find in churches or societies, like anti-Darwinist societies. They don't try to be evangelistic about continental young Earth creationism. They basically, it's like the attitude seems to be, well, we're living in a post-Christian culture that doesn't believe in much of anything. We'll let the atheists, the unbelievers, the skeptics believe what they want. We'll believe what we want. Okay? So most of the literature tends to be on tracts. It tends to be say photocopied stuff. They might read some American Young Earth creationist books too, because they don't have a lot of literature to go on. I mean, I knew one Continental Young Earth creationist when I lived in England who was reading a lot of, say, stuff from ICR, the Institute for Creation Research, just because he couldn't get resources. Now, he had to sort of draw the line between what's a proper biblical interpretation and what isn't. But, lacking, like what they would do is they would read stuff from ICR, they'd glean the scientific stuff out of it and sort of ignore the genealogy stuff. So the continental young Earth creationism is very complex in sort of its sociology. Okay, they're aware that nobody believes them. Well, they know this perfectly well. I asked a guy who lived in Switzerland, are there young Earth creationists over there? He goes, oh yeah. He goes, well, how do they reconcile their beliefs with science? He goes, oh, they don't. They don't. He goes, scientists believe what they believe. We religious people believe what we believe. Well, it's détente. So because their attitude is much more along the lines of détente, they don't put a lot of efforts into publishing. They don't put a lot of efforts. They put no efforts into theme parks. Okay. Oh, you're not going to get to go on the T-Rex ride. The Triceratops roller coaster. No betting on the Velociraptor races. Yeah, so you're just not going to find that over there. You're just not going to find that over there. That's not part of what they do. So, yeah, that's. I can't recommend you any resources because they're not into resources. They just. Yeah, sorry, no Swiss T-Rex rides. Well, anyway, thank you very much for that question. Appreciate the question. All right, let's see if there's any more here. Saint Ronan, good to see you here tonight. Asks the really important question: cheddar or mozzarella? Ooh. Oh. Yeah, that's a tough choice. That's a really tough choice. Because that is going to really depend upon what it's for. For macaroni and cheese, cheddar. Cheese on toast, cheddar. For chicken parmesan or a cutlet parmesan, mozzarella. Pizza, mozzarella. For tomato and cucumber Italian salad, mozzarella. Baby mozzarella. Fresh mozzarella, by the way, is absolutely wonderful. I used to make cheese. Loved making fresh mozzarella. It was so, oh my gosh, so good. Neither one is my favorite cheese. Okay. My favorite cheese is really Cambozola. Okay, that's my favorite cheese. Is Cambozola. It's kind of a cross between Stilton and Brie. Very, very yummy. It's one of the new German cheeses with a French, Italian sort of name, but it's marketing. Marketing. Okay? But it's delicious. I really, really like Cambozola. I like Stilton's. I like Schaus, as I've mentioned before. Beautiful. Those are beautiful, beautiful cheeses. I like Manchego. Manchego is delicious. Definitely love Manchego. So anyway, that's my discourse on cheese. Again, cheddar and mozzarella. Well, I'll pick Cambozola. I do like both cheddar and mozzarella, but again, it depends on the context and the application. And I have both cheddar and mozzarella in the fridge, so I eat both. Okay, let's see. Anything else here? And we've already hit past the 3rd hour now, so we are going to call it a night really soon. Here's an interesting question from AWL. When new dynasties assumed the throne, how did they establish their legitimacy religiously after being normal people? Very good question. There's a couple ways they did this. One way was to claim to have been an ancestor of somebody royal, or a descendant of someone royal, even if they weren't. Like, for example, the King's List at Abydos is essentially Seti the First's attempt to legitimize his rule. And what he does is he basically sort of goes back to the very first kings of Egypt and sort of lists them out, each one, and then puts him in the list. So, and in that, he also excludes some illegitimate kings, things he thought were illegitimate. He excludes the Hyksos kings. He excludes the Amarna kings. That's probably because they left a bad taste in everyone's mouth afterwards. But that's how, say, the first did it. In the case of Ramses II, he does this by venerating Akhmosa Nefertari. Now, Akhmosa Nefertari is the queen of the great mother of kings. She is the great queen of Amenhotep I. And she is the lineal descendant, lineal ancestor of all the Thutmoside rulers. So, that imagery of, say, basically saying, Ramses II is basically saying, hey, I'm venerating Akhmosa Nefertari because she's my mother too. So that's how he's trying to get that legitimacy, is by attaching himself to the cult of Akhmosa Nefertari. So that's how they establish the legitimacy religiously. Now, how successful that was, that's a different matter, because it wasn't always that successful. The Ramessides never did sort of patch things over with the Theban priesthoods. The Theban priesthood really, really wanted a Theban prince on the throne. The last Theban prince died with King Tut. There were no Theban princes after him. He was the end of the line. And part of the reason why the Thebans wanted a Theban prince was because he was also the king was also supposed to be the high priest of all of Egypt. So the Thebans were between a rock and a hard place. They really wanted a Theban king. They didn't have a Theban king. They had a king whose origins were from the Nile Delta, from commoner stock. So those tensions between the Ramessides and the priesthood, the priestly caste, didn't go away. It didn't go away. Some of those tensions were so great that, first of all, they had to pick. The Ramessides picked up and moved their capital from Thebes to Ramses, not just because it was the ancestral seat of the Ramesside clan, but also to get away from the Thebans. Because you wouldn't know when there was a dagger sort of hiding behind a curtain somewhere. The threat of assassination was always there. So, they sort of limited how much time they spent in Thebes, essentially. The other thing is too that you get to the point of, say, Ramses VIII, where, say, the relations between the Thebans and the Ramessides get so bad that Ramses VIII basically says, "Hey, I'm not even going to be buried in the Valley of the Kings. I'm going to bury myself elsewhere." So he built his tomb elsewhere. We don't know where he built his tomb because he was just so fed up with them. And finally, then the end of dynasty at 20 hits. You get a new 21st dynasty, and the Thebans say, "Well, nuts to this. We're going to do our own thing." So, in some ways, this is a legitimacy project of these kings, partially successful, but not completely successful. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the questions. Good question. Yeah. Probably going to wrap it up. We'll probably take one, maybe two. If I find a great second question soon after, I'll do. But if not, this might be the last one of the night. I'll take this one from Daniel Lowry. Do you think the biblical authors might have had room in their thinking for corporate or group persons? Yes. Oh, yes. Definitely. And that's because the biblical authors are thinking in terms of clans. Okay? They're thinking in terms of clans. They are thinking in terms of family groups. To a lesser extent, tribes and the nation itself. But they are definitely thinking in terms of corporate guilt, corporate responsibility. For example, there's basically if a murder takes place outside of the confines of a city, a body is found. It's been murdered. Someone's been murdered. The leaders of the town are supposed to get a young bull, bring it out to the place where it's. Well, this is after a full investigation, And at that point, they're supposed to pour water over the hand. All the elders of the city are supposed to pour water over the hand, saying, "We don't know who did this. Not our fault, as far as we know. Nobody in the city did this." And then it's supposed to break the neck of the young bull, and as a form of sacrifice. And it's a way of trying to defer corporate responsibility away from the town. So there is an aspect in the biblical authors thinking that corporate groups have responsibility. We also see this, for example, in the book of Revelation, where the 7 churches are treated as having corporate responsibility. Each church is either said, "Hey, you're doing well, or you're doing real poor. You're doing so poor, I'm going to take your lampstand away." So, those churches are being treated as corporate bodies having corporate responsibility. And I think this is something that we see. We don't see so much in Western interpretation. We do see this more in say Eastern views of say Christianity. Some of this has to do with American individualism. In say North America, individual rights, individual responsibility are say preeminent. In the East, we see corporate responsibility cultures have say greater significance. In clan societies like you find in Israel, a clan can bear the brunt of one bad actor, especially if they didn't turn the person over. This is why, say, clan retribution can be awful terrible sometimes. Is, for example, one member of a clan, rapes a person in another clan. The response is for that other clan to wipe out the clan of the rapist. And then that's because if you can't guarantee the security of your clan, then the clan becomes easy pickings for other clans. So there is definitely there's actually a lot of room in their thinking for corporate. In fact, in many ways, group thinking takes precedence over individual thoughts, over the individual actions of persons. We see this throughout the genealogical trees. That many times there are the genealogies of clans, posterity of clans, and how they behaved. Certain responsibilities are rewarded. Some certain group responsibilities get rewarded because of the actions of, say, the clan. This is one of the reasons why, say, the Levites get separated, because the tribe of Levi decided not to worship the golden calf. They stayed out. So they're given new and special responsibilities because of their obedience and the decision of the entire tribe. So, absolutely, there's definitely, we find this all over the place in the Bible, all over the place. So yes, definitely. But I would recommend, if you want to see more of this, do check out the writings that have been done on clans. Especially Clinton Bailey's book is very good about this. It does talk about clan culture, even though some of its biblical exegesis is off. The principles in there are very, very sound and it's a good book. It's well worth reading. Well worth reading. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciate the question. Okay, and I'm going to take one more, and then I'm calling it a night. And if there's not one more, I'm calling it a night anyway. If I decide there's nothing else I want to answer, it's going to be end of the night. Okay, I'll take this last one. This is going to be the last one of the night. Jude 3 asks, how do I become a New Testament scholar coming out of high school? Go to college. That's basically how you do it. To become a New Testament scholar requires, of course, knowing your Greek. You should know Hebrew as well. A great way to do this is start with basically, going to seminary, getting a basic. First of all, get a bachelor's degree. You basically have to get a bachelor's degree. Something in the humanities is very good for this, like philosophy, like religious studies. Although a lot of people who start in religious studies end up not believing by the time they get out of it. Get your Greek and Hebrew, especially your Greek, as early as possible. If you can get your Greek in your undergrad, absolutely excellent. Okay, because that's going to need to be a prerequisite for graduate school. So take Greek in your undergrad. Okay, you have to understand that becoming a New Testament scholar is a long haul. You're usually going to get a Bachelor of Arts, and then 1 or 2 master's degrees, and then you're going to go on and do your PhD. So that's a fairly normal route for a New Testament scholar. You're going to go into basically your undergrad. You're going to do your foundation courses. You're going to do your Greek. Then you're going to go to graduate school. You're either going to do an MDiv, THM, or you're going to do a bunch of MAs. And you're going to take more Greek and more biblical exegesis. Okay? And then when you go to your PhD, you're going to specialize into something involving, New Testament scholarship, whatever you decide is an interesting subject for you. So basically, coming out of high school, first thing you're going to need is a bachelor's degree. You don't have to kill yourself getting the best bachelor's degree from the best school. Doesn't hurt though. Doesn't hurt. Do pick a good school. It doesn't have to be the absolute best school, but it does have to be a good school. So I wouldn't recommend a community college, but a decent university. Possibly many Christian colleges do offer very, very good bachelor's degrees that you can pursue. But make sure it's a good school. Make sure it's a credible school. Accreditation does matter. It does matter, and I can tell a lot of people who have decided not to go the accredited route do have deficits in their training. Because this is what you're doing. You are being trained to handle the Bible competently. Okay? A good New Testament scholar can handle the New Testament with extreme competence and accuracy. That takes time to develop. It's not a fast route. You're not going to get there quickly. Okay? But in order to get there, you have to start going back to school. So as soon as you're coming out of high school, get yourself into a bachelor's program and get your Greek. Get some foundation courses, and then once you get to that bachelor's degree, then you can consider doing a master's degree, and that's when you really start learning how to be a New Testament scholar. So you're just starting out here. You're no worse than you're done. But that's sort of the course you take. Bachelor's degree with Greek, then you can go to seminary or grad school, and then you go on from there. So that's how you do it. Anyway, thank you very much for the question. Very, very much appreciate that. Okay. And that is going to be our final question for the night. I want to thank everyone who's joined us tonight. It was a great set of questions tonight. A lot of fun, especially the ones on cheese. They love the questions on cheese. I also want to thank everyone who donated a super chat. Your super chats do keep us going. Without your super chats, we wouldn't be able to continue producing these videos on the schedule we do. We do very, very much appreciate it. We also want to thank our Patreon supporters. Our Patreon supporters pay for equipment upgrades, new equipment. When things break, it's their donations that really, really help us here. So we want to really, really thank our Patreon supporters. And we also want to thank our subscribers. And we also want to say that if you enjoy this content and you want to see more, please hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you don't miss out on anything. So, and also leave comments and feed the algorithm. So, with all that said, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Good night, everyone.